3 days can feel like a lifetime when the entire kingdom believes you're guilty. Evelyn Carter kept her eyes on the stone floor as the heavy doors of the tribunal hall closed behind her with a deep echo. The sound rolled through the chamber like a final verdict. Around her, whispers drifted from the rows of nobles gathered beneath silver banners embroidered with the crest of Mooncrest Kingdom. No one spoke loudly. They didn't need to. The looks were enough. Suspicion, judgment, satisfaction. Evelyn stood alone at the center of the room, her hands trembling despite every effort to remain calm. Just 48 hours earlier, she had been an unremarkable Omega working in the royal archives. Quiet, invisible, safe. Then the Star Heart relic had disappeared. The kingdom's most treasured artifact. A symbol of peace kept under constant protection for generations. And somehow, evidence had appeared pointing directly to her. A witness claimed to have seen her near the vault. A servant reported seeing her leave the restricted wing after midnight. A piece of fabric matching her cloak had been discovered outside the archive tower. One coincidence might have been ignored. 3 had destroyed her life. The High Chancellor rose from his chair, his expression cold. Evelyn Carter, until the investigation concludes, you will remain under royal supervision. The words sounded formal, but everyone knew what they meant. She was the kingdom's favorite suspect. If the relic was not recovered soon, blame would settle permanently on her shoulders. Evelyn swallowed hard. The fear pressing against her chest felt heavier than the stone walls surrounding her. She wanted to defend herself, to scream that she had done nothing wrong. But every explanation she offered only seemed to make things worse. The tribunal dismissed her moments later. Outside, gray clouds stretched across the afternoon sky. A cold wind swept through the capital streets. Evelyn pulled her worn cloak tighter and walked without direction. People stared as she passed. News traveled quickly in Mooncrest. By sunset, nearly everyone would know her name. Not as the innocent archive assistant she had been yesterday, but as the girl connected to the kingdom's greatest scandal. She stopped beside a fountain near the market square. The water reflected her pale face and worried blue eyes. 3 days. The investigators had quietly given themselves 3 days before presenting final recommendations to the crown. 3 days before her future would be decided. 3 days before everything she loved could vanish. You look like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. The voice startled her. Evelyn turned. An old woman sat beneath a striped awning nearby. She wore layers of faded shawls and silver rings that caught the fading sunlight. Her sharp green eyes studied Evelyn with unsettling certainty. I'm not interested in fortune tellers, Evelyn muttered. The woman smiled. Good. I'm not offering fortunes. Slowly, she reached beneath the table and placed a tiny glass bottle in front of her. Inside shimmered a pale pink liquid that seemed to glow from within. Evelyn stared at it. What is that? The old woman folded her hands. A chance. Evelyn almost laughed. I don't need a chance. I need proof. Proof won't save you fast enough. The woman's gaze drifted toward the distant royal palace rising above the city skyline. But the Alpha King might. Evelyn followed her eyes. Every citizen knew of Alpha King Damian Blackwood, the most powerful ruler in the Northern Territories. Untouchable, respected, feared. A man whose approval could change destinies overnight. Her pulse quickened. Why would he help me? The old woman pushed the bottle closer. Because sometimes survival begins with a lie. A chill ran through Evelyn's body. Somewhere beyond the city, thunder rumbled softly across the horizon. And for the first time since her nightmare began, a dangerous possibility entered her mind. If the kingdom had already decided she was guilty, perhaps innocence alone would never save her. The bottle felt heavier than it looked. Evelyn stared at the pale pink liquid resting in her palm, as the old woman's words echoed through her thoughts. A chance. Not hope. Not salvation. Just a chance. The difference mattered more than she wanted to admit. The evening air had grown colder by the time she returned to her small apartment above the archive district. The familiar room, once comforting, now felt like a place she might soon lose forever. Books lined the shelves. Stacks of copied records covered the desk by the window. A pressed wildflower remained tucked into the corner of a mirror exactly where she had left it months ago. Every object seemed to belong to a different life. A life that was already slipping away. Evelyn carefully set the bottle on the table and sat beside it. The liquid shimmered softly beneath the candlelight. It looked harmless, beautiful even. Yet she could not stop imagining everything that could go wrong. The Alpha King was not an ordinary man. Damian Blackwood ruled territories stretching hundreds of miles beyond Mooncrest's borders. Stories about him traveled from kingdom to kingdom. Some claimed he could sense deception before a word was spoken. Others insisted he remembered every face he had ever seen. No one agreed on how much of the rumors were true, but everyone agreed on one thing. He was impossible to manipulate, which made the bottle seem ridiculous. Evelyn rested her head in her hands. What kind of desperate person considered using a forbidden potion on the most powerful alpha in the realm? The answer came immediately. Someone with 3 days left before her life was destroyed. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. She quickly hid the bottle beneath a folded blanket. Moments later, her closest friend entered without waiting for permission. Clara Bennett had never respected doors. The blonde Omega carried a basket of bread and immediately froze when she saw Evelyn's expression. "You look worse than this morning," Clara said softly. Evelyn attempted a smile and failed. Clara set the basket down and sat beside her. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally Clara reached into her coat pocket and unfolded a small invitation stamped with the royal seal. Evelyn's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "The palace announced a winter reception tomorrow night." Clara slid the invitation across the table. Every archive employee was invited because of the restoration project. Evelyn stared at the elegant lettering. Tomorrow night. The Alpha King would be there. Suddenly the room felt much smaller. Clara studied her carefully. "You are thinking about something dangerous." Evelyn forced a laugh. "Why would you say that?" "Because every time you get quiet, trouble follows." Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. It lasted only a second. After Clara left, silence returned. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the window. Evelyn walked to the table and uncovered the bottle once more. The palace reception represented the first opportunity she would ever have to stand within a few feet of Damian Blackwood. The first and perhaps only chance to change her fate. Her gaze drifted toward the invitation, then back to the potion. Midnight came and went. Sleep never arrived. By dawn, exhaustion shadowed her eyes, but her decision had finally settled into place. Whether the potion worked or failed no longer mattered. Doing nothing guaranteed disaster. Taking the risk at least offered possibility. Evelyn picked up the bottle and slipped it into her coat pocket. As sunlight spilled across the rooftops of Mooncrest, she whispered a quiet prayer to no one in particular. Tomorrow night she would walk into the royal palace. Tomorrow night she would stand before Alpha King Damian Blackwood. And somehow she would ask fate for one impossible chance. The royal palace seemed larger than any building Evelyn had ever seen. Golden lights shimmered through towering windows as elegant carriages arrived one after another along the curved stone drive. Music drifted into the evening air, mixing with laughter and conversation. Everyone looked confident, important, certain of their place in the world. Evelyn felt none of those things. She stood at the edge of the grand entrance, her invitation clutched tightly in one hand while the small glass bottle remained hidden inside her coat pocket. For a moment she considered turning around. No one would stop her. No one would notice if she disappeared back into the city. But then she remembered the tribunal chamber, the whispers, the accusations, the clock counting down toward the end of her future. She straightened her shoulders and stepped inside. Crystal chandeliers illuminated a ballroom large enough to fit several city blocks. Silver banners hung from the vaulted ceiling. Nobles, diplomats, merchants, and scholars filled the room in a sea of shimmering gowns and tailored suits. Every conversation seemed to blend into a single hum of wealth and influence. Evelyn had attended royal functions before as an archive assistant, but never anything like this. Tonight carried a different energy. Anticipation. Expectation. Everyone was waiting for someone. Then the music softened. Conversations gradually faded. Heads turned toward the upper staircase overlooking the ballroom. A silence spread through the hall. Evelyn followed the crowd's gaze. Alpha King Damian Blackwood had arrived. He descended the marble staircase with calm, measured steps. No royal announcement accompanied him. None was necessary. His presence alone commanded attention. Tall and composed, he moved through the room with effortless confidence. Dark hair framed features that seemed carved from stone, while silver eyes quietly surveyed the gathering below. Yet what struck Evelyn most was not his appearance. It was the stillness around him. Everyone else seemed eager to impress someone. Damien appeared completely untouched by any need for approval. As he entered the ballroom, conversations resumed, but softer now. More careful. Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken. The man standing 50 feet away represented her only chance. The thought made her stomach twist. Hours passed. She waited, watched, failed repeatedly to gather enough courage to approach him. Damien spoke with ambassadors, council members, and visiting nobles. Every attempt Evelyn made to move closer seemed interrupted by another wave of important guests. Soon she began wondering whether fate was mocking her. Then an opportunity appeared. Near midnight, Damien stepped away from the crowd and moved toward a quiet balcony adjoining the ballroom. No guards followed him immediately. No officials approached. For the first time all evening he stood alone. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. This was it. She slipped through the gathering guests and reached a refreshment table positioned near the balcony entrance. Her hands trembled as she retrieved the bottle from her pocket. The pale pink liquid glowed faintly beneath the crystal lights. The old woman's words echoed once more. A chance. Not a guarantee. Just a chance. Taking a steady breath, Evelyn carefully emptied the contents into a glass of sparkling cider prepared for the king. The liquid disappeared instantly. No color remained. No sign of what she had done. Her heart nearly stopped as she placed the glass back onto the silver tray. Then footsteps approached. Damien reached for the drink without hesitation. For one impossible second, Evelyn thought he might somehow know. His silver eyes briefly met hers across the room. The contact lasted less than a heartbeat. Yet something strange flickered within them. Awareness. Recognition. Or perhaps imagination fueled by fear. Then he lifted the glass and drank every drop. Evelyn stood frozen. The room seemed to vanish around her. Only the empty glass remained. The potion was gone. The choice had been made. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Nothing happened. At least not immediately. Evelyn remained near the refreshment table, pretending to study the ballroom while secretly watching Damien Blackwood from across the room. Every heartbeat felt louder than the music. Every second stretched endlessly. She had imagined dozens of possibilities. Perhaps he would suddenly become unusually friendly. Perhaps he would seek her out. Perhaps there would be some obvious sign that the potion had worked. Instead, the Alpha King continued speaking with diplomats as though nothing had changed. Doubt quickly crept into her thoughts. Maybe the old woman had lied. Maybe the potion was fake. Maybe she had just risked everything for nothing. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Damien finally excused himself from a conversation and began walking across the ballroom. Evelyn lowered her eyes immediately. There was no reason for him to notice her. Hundreds of guests filled the palace tonight. She was nobody, a disgraced archive assistant under investigation. Yet the sound of approaching footsteps grew closer, then stopped. Her pulse stumbled. Miss Carter. Evelyn looked up so quickly she nearly lost her balance. Damien stood directly before her. Up close, his presence felt even more overwhelming. His silver eyes studied her calmly. Not cold, not warm, simply attentive. As if she were suddenly the most interesting person in the room. Your Majesty, she managed. He nodded slightly. I believe we have not been formally introduced. Around them, nearby conversations noticeably quieted. Curious glances drifted in their direction. Evelyn could practically feel the attention gathering. No, Your Majesty, she replied. We have not. Damien regarded her for another moment before offering his arm. Walk with me. Her mind went completely blank. Walk with him. The Alpha King rarely spent time with strangers. Everyone knew that. Yet somehow he was inviting her to accompany him through the palace gardens in full view of half the kingdom. Evelyn forced herself to move before panic could stop her. Together they stepped onto a moonlit terrace overlooking the royal grounds. Cool night air replaced the warmth of the ballroom. Lanterns glowed along winding stone paths while fountains sparkled beneath the stars. For several moments neither spoke. Damien appeared perfectly comfortable with silence. Evelyn was not. "I imagine this evening has been difficult for you," he finally said. She froze. "What do you mean?" His gaze shifted toward the gardens. "The investigation." A knot formed in her stomach. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. "I am innocent," she said quietly. Damien looked at her then. Really looked at her. The intensity of his attention made it difficult to breathe. "I know." The answer came so easily that Evelyn nearly stopped walking. "You know?" she whispered. Damien gave a slight nod. "I know that people often mistake evidence for truth." Evelyn stared at him. No one had said anything remotely kind to her in days. Most people avoided her entirely. Others looked at her with suspicion. Yet the Alpha King sounded almost certain she deserved the benefit of doubt. The conversation continued for nearly 30 minutes. To Evelyn's astonishment, Damien asked questions about her work in the archives. Her favorite books. The old maps she restored. The forgotten histories she enjoyed studying. No ruler had ever shown interest in such ordinary things. Stranger still, he seemed genuinely engaged by every answer. By the time they returned toward the ballroom, confusion had completely replaced her fear. The potion had worked. It had to have. Nothing else made sense. Yet as they reached the entrance, Damien paused. His eyes briefly scanned the crowd gathering beyond the glass doors. Something unreadable crossed his expression. Awareness. Calculation. Then it vanished. He offered Evelyn a reassuring smile. "Stay close to me tonight." The words sounded simple. Casual even. But something about them sent a chill through her. Because for the first time since entering the palace, she realized Damien Blackwood was not watching her. He was watching everyone else. The next morning, the entire capital seemed to be talking about the same thing. Evelyn Carter had spent nearly an hour at the royal reception beside Alpha King Damien Blackwood. By sunrise, the story had spread through markets, cafes, government offices, and noble estates alike. Some called it shocking. Others called it impossible. Evelyn called it terrifying. She sat at her desk in the archives pretending to organize restoration records while nervous thoughts raced through her mind. Every glance from her co-workers felt loaded with questions. Every whisper made her wonder what people believed had happened between her and the king. The worst part was that she could not explain it herself. Damien's attention had been genuine. His interest had seemed real. The potion must have worked. It was the only explanation she could find. Yet something about the previous night continued to bother her. The way he had watched the crowd. The way he seemed concerned whenever certain nobles approached. The way his expression had briefly hardened whenever conversations drifted toward the missing Starheart relic. A sudden knock interrupted her thoughts. The archive supervisor appeared at the doorway looking unusually nervous. "Miss Carter," he said, "you have been requested at the palace." Evelyn nearly dropped the document she was holding. Requested by whom? The man's expression made the answer obvious. Less than an hour later, she found herself entering the royal palace once again. This time there were no musicians. No glittering ballroom. No celebration. She was escorted through quiet hallways lined with portraits of past rulers before arriving at a private study overlooking the city. Damien stood beside a tall window with sunlight streaming across the room. He turned when she entered. "Thank you for coming." Evelyn tried not to stare. "Your Majesty." Damien motioned toward a chair near a large table covered with maps and reports. "Please sit." She obeyed. Her pulse immediately quickened when she noticed several documents spread across the tabletop. One contained a sketch of the missing Starheart relic. Another displayed names she did not recognize. Several locations had been circled in red ink. Damien followed her gaze. "You worked in the archive division, assigned to royal artifact records." It was not a question. "Yes," Evelyn replied carefully. "Then you may be able to help me understand something." He picked up a file and placed it before her. At first glance it appeared ordinary. Then she noticed a familiar signature. Her own. Confusion spread through her chest. "I do not remember this report." Damien nodded. "Because you did not write it." Evelyn stared at the page. The handwriting resembled hers. The signature matched hers. Yet several details felt wrong. Subtle differences. Tiny inconsistencies. Someone forged this, she whispered. Damien's expression remained calm. That is what I believe. For several seconds neither spoke. Evelyn looked from the forged document back to the Alpha King. Then why has nobody discovered this? She asked. Damien's gaze darkened slightly. Because someone wanted the investigation pointed toward you. The room suddenly felt colder. Evelyn remembered the evidence. The witnesses. The fabric. The accusations. For the first time she saw a terrifying possibility. None of it had been random. Someone had planned it. Someone had deliberately placed her at the center of the scandal. Damien folded his arms. The missing relic is important. His voice grew quieter. But I am beginning to suspect it was never the true objective. Evelyn frowned. What do you mean? Damien walked toward the window overlooking the city below. I believe someone is using the theft to distract attention from something much larger. Silence settled between them. Beyond the glass, clouds drifted across the skyline. Somewhere far below, thousands of citizens continued their daily routines completely unaware of the danger unfolding around them. Evelyn stared at the forged document resting on the table. Yesterday she thought she was fighting to clear her name. Today she realized she might have stumbled into a secret far bigger than herself. And judging by the concern hidden behind Damien Blackwood's calm expression, the Alpha King already knew just how dangerous that secret could become. There were moments when even a king could not afford to tell the truth. Damien Blackwood stood alone in his private office long after Evelyn had left the palace. Evening shadows stretched across the floor while the capital slowly disappeared beneath a blanket of golden lights. The forged report remained on his desk exactly where she had placed it. Beside it sat another object. A small crystal vial. Empty. Damien picked it up between his fingers and studied the faint traces of pink residue clinging to the glass. A quiet laugh escaped him. It had been years since anyone had attempted something so reckless. Most people feared him too much to try. Yet somehow Evelyn Carter had found the courage. Or perhaps desperation had simply become stronger than fear. Either way, she had managed to surprise him. He set the vial down and looked toward the city skyline. The truth was both simple and complicated. The moment he had lifted the drink at the reception, he had recognized the scent hidden beneath the sparkling cider. Ancient enchantment. Rare ingredients. Love potion. Most alphas would never have noticed. Damien was not most alphas. His family line carried unusual resistance to emotional manipulation magic. The protection had existed for generations, woven into the bloodline of Mooncrest rulers long before he was born. The potion had never affected him, not even for a second. Yet he had pretended otherwise. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. His chief advisor, Marcus Hale, stepped inside carrying several reports. He stopped when he noticed the vial. You kept it. Damien nodded. Marcus sighed. You should have confronted her immediately. Should I have? Damien asked calmly. Marcus placed the reports on the desk. She attempted to influence the Alpha King. No. Damien's voice remained steady. She attempted to survive. Silence followed. Marcus knew better than most people how carefully Damien observed others. The advisor had spent years watching him separate lies from motives. Eventually Marcus crossed his arms. You believe she is innocent. I know she is innocent. Damien turned toward the window again. The first thing she did after approaching me was panic. A faint smile touched his expression. The second thing she did was tell the truth whenever she forgot to be afraid. Marcus shook his head. That is not evidence. No. It is character. Damien's gaze hardened slightly. And character is often more reliable than evidence manufactured by skilled enemies. Marcus fell silent. Both men understood what was truly happening. The missing star heart relic was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Over the past year, Damien had quietly uncovered signs of corruption spreading through noble circles. Secret financial movements. False records. Disappearing witnesses. Hidden alliances. Someone was building something dangerous behind the scenes. Someone powerful. Then Evelyn had accidentally appeared at the center of it all. Damien had initially intended to observe her from a distance. The investigation would have cleared her eventually. But everything changed the moment he saw fear in her eyes at the reception. Not guilt. Not deception. Fear. The kind carried by someone cornered with no one left to trust. And then she had offered him the enchanted drink with trembling hands while clearly terrified of her own decision. Most people would call that foolish. Damien saw something else. Courage. The kind born from desperation. The kind that often changed history. Marcus finally broke the silence. What happens now? Damien's eyes drifted toward the city beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was probably convincing herself the potion had succeeded. The thought almost made him smile again. Now, he said quietly, we keep her alive long enough to discover why someone wants her destroyed. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant horizon. And for the first time in years, Damien realized the person he was protecting might also be the key to uncovering every secret his enemies had worked so hard to hide. The first sign that something had changed came 3 days later. Evelyn noticed it while walking through the archive district on her way home. People were still talking about her. Still whispering when she passed. But the whispers had shifted. They no longer sounded certain. Doubt had begun spreading through the city. Questions were replacing accusations. Somewhere behind the scenes, someone was quietly dismantling the story built against her. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt uneasy. Every step forward seemed to reveal another mystery. Damien continued meeting with her regularly inside the palace. Officially, she was assisting with historical records connected to the stolen star heart relic. Unofficially, she suspected the Alpha King was searching for something far more important. Together they examined old documents, merchant ledgers, and forgotten royal correspondences. Patterns slowly emerged. Certain noble families appeared repeatedly. Financial transactions disappeared from records only to reappear elsewhere. Entire sections of history had been quietly altered years before. The deeper they looked, the less the theft resembled a simple crime. One rainy afternoon, Evelyn sat alone in the palace library reviewing a stack of records when she overheard voices drifting from a nearby corridor. She recognized neither speaker. At first she paid little attention. Then she heard her own name. Instinctively she froze. The king spends too much time with her, one man said. It is becoming noticeable. A second voice responded. Perhaps he finally found someone interesting. Soft laughter followed. Interesting? Hardly. I heard a different explanation. Evelyn's stomach tightened. The first man lowered his voice. You mean the potion story? Silence followed. Then both men laughed again. Imagine believing she managed to enchant Damien Blackwood, one said. The royal bloodline has been immune to emotional enchantments for centuries. Evelyn's heart stopped. The library suddenly felt very quiet, very still. She remained frozen behind the bookshelf long after the voices disappeared. Immune. The word echoed through her thoughts again and again. Immune. Slowly she lowered the document in her hands. Her pulse became uneven. Memories flooded back. Damien drinking the enchanted cider. Damien approaching her afterward. Damien showing interest. Damien protecting her. Damien helping her. Every moment she had carefully explained through the potion suddenly looked different. A terrible possibility emerged. What if it had never worked? What if he had known all along? Evelyn pushed back from the table and stood. Her hands were trembling. No, there had to be another explanation. Yet the more she thought about it, the more impossible it became to ignore. Damien never seemed confused. Never seemed influenced. Never behaved irrationally. Everything he did had been deliberate. Controlled. Intentional. The realization struck harder than any accusation she had endured. Not because she feared punishment, but because she feared humiliation. Had he been laughing at her? Had every conversation been an act? Had every kindness come from pity? The questions followed her all the way home. That night sleep never came. Rain tapped softly against her apartment window while she sat awake replaying every memory. By dawn, exhaustion settled heavily across her shoulders. Yet one thought remained sharper than all the others. She needed answers. The next morning she arrived at the palace earlier than usual. But before she could request a meeting with Damien, she spotted 2 guards carrying boxes from an administrative office. One folder slipped free and landed on the floor. Papers scattered across the hallway. Instinctively, Evelyn moved to help gather them. Then she saw a familiar name. Her own. Curiosity overcame caution. Her eyes scanned the first page. The color drained from her face. It was a security report dated weeks before the royal reception. Weeks before she ever approached Damien. And written clearly across the top was a single line. Subject: Evelyn Carter. Continue discreet protection and observation. Authorized by Alpha King Damien Blackwood. The report remained burned into Evelyn's memory long after she left the palace that afternoon. Subject: Evelyn Carter. Continue discreet protection and observation. Authorized by Alpha King Damien Blackwood. The date alone changed everything. Weeks before the royal reception. Weeks before the enchanted drink. Weeks before she had ever spoken to him. Every explanation she had built over the past several days collapsed at once. By the time she reached her apartment, confusion had become something far more painful. She had believed the potion explained his attention. She had convinced herself that every act of kindness, every conversation, every moment spent together had been caused by magic. Now she knew at least part of that belief was false. Damien had been watching her long before any potion entered the story. The question was why. Evelyn paced her small apartment as evening shadows stretched across the walls. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Books sat untouched on the shelves. Dinner remained forgotten on the kitchen table. Her thoughts refused to settle. Had Damien investigated her because he suspected her? Had he viewed her as a useful witness? Or worse, had she simply become a problem he was obligated to manage? The possibility stung more than she expected. Somewhere along the way she had started trusting him, perhaps even depending on him. Realizing how little she actually understood frightened her. A sudden knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Clara stood outside holding a folded newspaper. One look at Evelyn's expression made her frown. "You look terrible." Evelyn forced a smile that convinced no one. Clara entered without waiting for permission and immediately placed the newspaper on the table. The city council released another statement. Evelyn glanced down. The headline made her pause. Investigation expands beyond initial suspects. Her name was nowhere in the article. For the first time since the scandal began, public attention was shifting away from her. She should have felt grateful. Instead she felt hollow. Clara watched her carefully. What happened? Evelyn hesitated. Then she told her everything. The overheard conversation. The immunity to enchantments. The security report. The realization that Damien had known far more than he ever admitted. When she finished, silence filled the room. Clara slowly sat beside her. "You think he lied to you?" Evelyn laughed bitterly. "I know he did. Maybe." Clara folded her hands. "Or maybe he was protecting something." Evelyn looked away. "That sounds exactly like something a king would say." The next morning brought no clarity. Instead, it brought an invitation. A royal messenger arrived shortly after sunrise carrying a sealed letter bearing Damien's crest. Evelyn stared at it for nearly a minute before finally opening it. The message was short. "Meet me in the West Garden at sunset. We need to talk. Damien." She read the words 3 times. Then folded the letter and set it aside. Sunset arrived sooner than expected. The West Garden overlooked the edge of the palace grounds where fountains and flowering trees created a peaceful escape from the noise of the capital. Damien was already waiting when Evelyn arrived. He stood beside a marble fountain, hands clasped behind his back. The fading sunlight painted the sky gold and silver above him. For a moment neither spoke. Then Damien turned toward her. His expression softened the instant he saw her face. And somehow that made everything worse. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "you found the report." She stopped walking. "You knew I would." Damien did not deny it. The silence between them stretched painfully. Finally Evelyn looked directly into his silver eyes. "Tell me one thing honestly." Her voice trembled despite her efforts. From the very beginning, was any of it real? For the first time since she had met him, Damien Blackwood seemed completely unprepared for an answer. For several long seconds, the only sound in the West Garden was the gentle splash of water from the fountain. Damien held Evelyn's gaze without looking away. The fading sunlight reflected in his silver eyes, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked less like a king and more like a man carrying the weight of too many secrets. Finally he spoke. Yes. The single word hit harder than she expected. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. Damien took a slow breath. Some of it began as duty. He did not try to soften the truth. When your name first appeared in the investigation, I ordered a quiet review. Certain details did not make sense. The evidence against you was too perfect. Too convenient. Evelyn folded her arms across her chest. So I was a case file. At first, Damien admitted. Yes. The honesty hurt, but somehow it also made it harder to be angry. He could have lied. He could have hidden behind excuses. Instead, he stood before her and accepted responsibility. Damien stepped closer. Then I read every report connected to you. I learned about your work. Your record. Your character. The people who trusted you. The people who respected you. His voice softened. And the more I learned, the less I believed the accusations. Evelyn looked away. That still does not explain the reception. A faint smile appeared on Damien's face. No, it does not. He reached into his coat pocket and removed something small. A familiar crystal vial. Empty. The same bottle that had once held the enchanted potion. Evelyn's eyes widened. Damien glanced at it before returning his attention to her. I recognized what it was the moment I smelled it. Her face immediately flushed with embarrassment. You knew. Immediately. And you let me believe it worked? Yes. The answer came quietly. Not proudly. Not mockingly. Simply truth. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Why? Damien looked down at the vial in his hand. Because I saw how frightened you were. The words caught her off guard. You were standing alone in a room filled with powerful people. Your future was collapsing. Someone was trying to destroy your life. And despite all of that, you still found the courage to take a risk. He shook his head slightly. I was never amused by it, Evelyn. I was worried about you. She stared at him. Every explanation she had imagined suddenly felt wrong. Damien continued. The potion never changed my feelings. The evening breeze stirred the leaves overhead. But it did reveal yours. Not affection. Not manipulation. Fear. Desperation. Hope. He stepped forward one final time. And after that night, I stopped investigating a suspect. I started protecting a person. Emotion rose unexpectedly in Evelyn's chest. For days she had convinced herself she had been a joke. Problem. A responsibility. Yet nothing in Damien's expression suggested pity. Only sincerity. Only care. He held up the empty vial and placed it gently on the edge of the fountain. This never had any power over me. The glass caught the last rays of sunset before slipping from his fingers and falling into the water below. Small ripples spread across the surface. Damien's gaze never left hers. What changed everything was you. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Not uncertain. Peaceful. At last, Evelyn smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. The accusations against her would soon disappear. The conspiracy behind the stolen relic would eventually be exposed. The kingdom would move forward. But standing there beneath the evening sky, none of those things felt as important as the simple truth she finally understood. The magic had failed. The potion had failed. Yet somehow, despite every mistake, every secret, and every misunderstanding, two hearts had found each other anyway.